In this video, we'll make a responsive CSS grid website. Okay guys, so let's take a look at the simple layout here that we have. We have a logo in the upper left hand corner, our social media icons here in the upper right, and then we have this banner image of mountains, and then a content section with text, an image on the right for the sidebar, and then our footer at the very bottom. So as you can see on the right, here is the simple mobile version of the CSS grid layout. In the description of the video will be the CSS grid website starter files, so just make sure that you have index.html and then style.css, which is in the CSS folder, open in your text editor as well as your web browser. So I'm using Sublime Text for my text editor, and then I'm just going to be using Google Chrome to have it display in my browser here. Alright, so once you've downloaded those starter files, go ahead and open them up, and this is what you should see once you have Google Chrome and Sublime Text open. So all of the HTML is already laid out for us because it's so simple using CSS Grid, and I'm going to go over the HTML here as we're laying out the CSS. But really quickly before we get started, you'll notice that each section has a simple div class that we're using, and then if you're wondering what the Font Awesome style sheet is linked in the head section along with where the images are coming from, you can see the starter files, and then there are the icons there in the social section that we're using from Font Awesome, which you can do a simple Google search for. So let's move over to our style sheet here and get started with some simple styles before we actually get to the CSS grid CSS, as well as the media queries with the grid in there. So the first thing that I'm going to do is style our wrapper that we have, and I'm going to give it a width of 100%. And then we'll give it a color of hashtag 666, which is kind of a gray color for our text. Now let's drop down and give our logo image a little padding. So write .logo image for the logo class, and then we'll give it a padding of 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right. So now if we refresh, there we have a little space going on up there. So next, let's style the social icons moving down the web page. So Font Awesome icons always start with a class that's just FA. So let's give our icons a padding of 10 pixels all around. Let's give them a font size of 30 pixels. Or it might actually get the inherent 150%. And then let's drop down and let's give them a width of 20 pixels, or that's 140%. And then let's give it a text align center, and then text decoration none to remove the underline. So now if we refresh, we've done away with the underline. Now let's give it a little bit of margin. So we'll give it a margin of 10 pixels top and bottom, and then 2 pixels left and right. And lastly, let's give it a color, and this is going to be the same as the logo. It's a hex value of 3E474F. So 3E474F. Okay, so if we refresh, there we have our icons with the margin and the color looking like the original. The only other thing that we'll do is let's give it a different color when we hover over it for fun here. So we'll give it the color of 666, which is that sort of light gray color that our text is going to take. And then we'll have, let's just make sure that the text decoration stays as none, though I don't think it's necessary actually, which would keep it from having the underline. Oh, that's right. So when it's on cell phones, you want to make sure that you do that because it's going to inherently make it a link. Alright, so now let's give our image a max width of 100%. And if we refresh, it should only take up the page width. Okay. So now we can drop down and let's get started with our grid CSS. So I'm just going to create a little space here so we're not looking at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll get started. So the first thing that we'll cover is going to be our logo, and we're going to give each section a style called grid-area and then the name of the class, or you can really call it whatever you like, but we'll want to reference it later. So just remember if you call it something different from the class. So next we'll do the social icons, followed by the banner, content, and sidebar, then the footer. So I'll just paste this in here again, or for the first time rather, and write social and social, and then I'll drop down and do the banner for our banner image. Okay, and then drop down and let's do our sidebar with that leaf image. So I'll just write it out this time. Grid area sidebar. And then let's do the content section. So grid area colon content. And then lastly, let's do the footer. Okay. So now if we refresh the page, nothing is going to change just yet. And I'm just going to give a little bit of padding to both the sidebar and content sections. Padding of 10 pixels all around so the image and text aren't pushed up against the side of our screen here. So that looks a little better. So once we get to our media queries, that's when it's going to start to take its form here with the layout. So for the footer, I'm going to give that a background color here. So let's just add a little bit more style. So we'll give it a background color which is the same as the logo and the icons. The hex value is 3E474F. And then let's give it a color of white, so that's just FFF, or you can write white, and then a padding of 10 pixels, and then let's align the text in the center, so text align center. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have our footer displaying for us. Alright, so next let's drop down, and what we'll want to do is reference the wrapper class again for our grid sections. So now what we'll do is define the grid areas inside of our wrapper. So just write display grid and then grid dash template dash areas and then colon and drop down, and in quotations we're going to add each one of our sections that we added for the classes above. So we have logo, social, banner, content, sidebar, and footer. Okay, so now let's go ahead and drop down, and we'll start with our first media query. So with our wrapper there with the grid template areas, this is how it's going to display by default without the media queries, just as we see it with the original version, with the HTML content laid out on top of one another. Alright, so now let's add media only, screen, and min for minimum, width 500 pixels. So media only, screen, and min width 500 pixels, and then open and close your swirly brackets. And inside of this, what we'll do again is reference the wrapper, and we'll define the grid template columns and grid template areas again. So for the min width 500 pixels, we'll have two different columns that we can use with each grid section. So for this one, let's just do 20% and then auto. We're not actually going to use any of the two column sections here. For the min width 500 pixels, it's going to display, we're going to display the grid template areas just as we did with the wrapper above by default. So a single column layout. So we have logo and logo since there's two columns, and then we'll do the same with social and banner. So the first of the two would be the 20%, and then the second would be the auto width. Alright, and then content. Then we'll do sidebar. And lastly, let's do footer. Alright. So now let's drop down and let's add the media query that's going to give us the layout for the full width version, where we're going to have 3 columns active instead of the 2. Okay, so this is media only screen and min width 600 pixels. Okay, and then again we'll reference the wrapper, and inside of that we'll define the width for our grid template columns. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it to make it easier on us and shorten the tutorial's length. So for the grid template columns, our first column will be 200 pixels. Our second is auto. And then let's do 350 pixels for the last. Alright, so this right here is displaying at 350 pixels, the sidebar. Alright, so let's go ahead and do our layout here. So right now we're only seeing it display at 600 pixels for the full width. Or I'm sorry, it's displaying minus the third column, because we are only displaying 2 of our, or defining 2 of our grid template areas below. So what we'll need to do is have 3 different grid template areas rather than 2. Alright, so let's go back to our style sheet here. And what I'm going to do is, for the first of our grid template areas, we'll have logo, logo, social. So we'll have the logo take up 200 pixels, and then automatically for the third column, if it needs the space, it's going to take up that space. Or I'm sorry, for the second column. And then the social sections will take up 350 pixels. Alright, so then for the second, we'll have our banner image displaying at the full width here. And then what we'll want is content, content, sidebar. So our sidebar section will be at 350 pixels, and our content will be taking up the 200 pixels, and then the automatic width in the center. And then for the last, the bottom, it's going to be the footer across the entire page. So we'll have footer, footer, footer. So now if we refresh, each one of the third of the grid template areas are in there, so it's going to take up the full width. And what we could do just to experiment here is, if we have logo, 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 and then social beneath it. Let me just show you here. We'll have them on different lines or different rows here. And then you can also experiment with the widths for the grid template columns. Alright, so we don't have a third, so let's go ahead and add the social here. Alright, and we can also experiment with the content and sidebar sections if you like. So we could change the sidebar to be on the left and the content on the right. So now the sidebar is only displaying at the 200 pixels off to the left, but we can change the width in grid template columns to 400, and let's see what we come up with. Okay, so there we go. And now let's take a look at how it appears for us responsively. So first I'll change this back. With the sidebar after content. Alright. And now let's take a quick look at the mobile version. So here we have it. Under 600 pixels, it's going to go to a single column width. And that does it for our introduction to CSS Grid with this simple website layout. So thanks for sticking around. I'll see you in the next video.